A lot of data leaders think the core problem is a lack of what they call a data culture. And there's a lot of finger pointing and a lot of blame going on with a lot of data leaders saying, you organization, you people outside of the data organization don't have a data culture. So I'm doing my best here, right? I'm publishing the dashboards, I'm building the data science models, I'm doing the stuff, I'm doing the work, I'm trying to get you to come to the darn governance meetings and you don't show up. So that's my evidence that you don't embrace data and there's no data culture here, and I'm doing the best I can. And after 16 to 18 months, I'm probably just going to leave.
Welcome to What Gets Measured, a Ninja Cat podcast about marketing, performance management, metrics, and effectiveness. Because what gets measured gets managed. I'm your host, Jake Sanders. With over 25 years of experience in data and analytics, Malcolm Hawker is Chief Data Officer at Prophecy and a recognized thought leader and advisor in the field of master data management and data governance. Having helped some of the world's largest businesses to improve their enterprise information management strategies, Malcolm is constantly sharing practical and actionable insights on how to leverage data as a strategic asset. And he's here today to talk about modern data leadership. Malcolm, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Jacob. It's my honor to be here.
Well, it's our honor to have you here, too. You wrote a book, Modern Data Leadership. I wanted this whole thing to be about data leadership. Can you just explain briefly where the idea for the book came from?
Yeah.
And, just kind of give us the cliff notes, the main takeaways?
Yeah. So what I wrote was technically an ebook. It was the zygote, as it were, of a to-be book, which will be published next year, 2025, by Wiley. So
Nice.
Depending on when you listen to this, it may have already been out. If you're catching this later in 2025, if you're catching it in 2024, TBD, it will hit the shelves sometime early 2025. But I did publish an ebook titled Modern Data Leadership.
Yeah.
And the genesis of that really came from my 3 years as an analyst at Gartner. So as a Gartner analyst, I was given this amazing gift of talking to no fewer than 1,500 CDOs and CIOs and VPs of data and analytics and people that do data for a living.
Right.
Like it's part of these things called client inquiries is what Gartner calls them. So when a Gartner analyst isn't writing magic quadrants or taking surveys or doing other or speaking on stages at summits in exotic places,
All right.
they take these things called client inquiries. And it is, in essence, they're very highly compressed consulting sessions with data leaders where you're sharing best practices, where you're sharing, what works and what doesn't work. And I got into that role rather honestly because I had spent a number of years in the field. I had run a data and analytics function. I've run an IT function. I have been a consultant. I've worked for data vendors. I've worked for software vendors. So just about every hat you can wear, I've worn. Get into my Gartner role, and it's fantastic. It's an awesome company. But I started to notice some things that I had seen for years and years, but I'd never really kind of been able to put my hand around.
Mhm.
And that's the idea that data leaders are following what are otherwise called best practices, right? The data leaders are doing their best. Their heads are down. They're working awfully hard. They're pushing these boulders up hills, as it were. And consistently, time and time again, every time we take surveys around the effectiveness of those data leaders, the results aren't that good. For example, in the last CDO survey of over 700 CDOs taken by Gartner, only 44% of CDOs said they're delivering meaningful value to their businesses. And that's a self-assessment. So think about that. Like in a self-assessment where
I would totally be lying. I would be padding that resume, right?
Yeah. Exactly. There is something called the Dunning-Kruger effect where we think we're actually better at everything than we really, really are. So
I've heard of that.
Yeah. So bias, so just consider that it's a self-assessment and CDOs are basically saying, hey, no, we're actually not delivering value.
Right.
And whether we want to look at data governance, where we consistently fail to deliver value, if we want to look at other data management practices that consistently struggle to get off the ground, my world, MDM, is known as a bear trap for companies. Tough to do, tough to implement. So time and time again, we see data leaders trying their best, following best practices, taking the advice of Gartner, taking the advice of thought leaders, yet failing to realize the transformative value of data. right? We can go back, we can talk about the big data debacle, right? About money, millions spent on Hadoop clusters. We can go back 4 to 5 years ago when this idea of digital transformation, digital acceleration happened, and a few companies did it, but most did not. Here we are on the cusp of another potential gold mine around AI.
Oh yeah,
and the data needed to enable AI at scale in organizations, and our data leaders ready? Most are not. Most are saying they are not. So it's not like this bell has rung for the first time, right? The bell rings every 4 to 5 years and it says, hey, data leaders, are you ready? And what we see is, well, maybe not. Well, so I was trying to figure it all out.
Yeah. I mean, so keep going. I'm sorry. I mean, keep going. You have the floor.
I'm like, well, what gives, right? Like, what's going on? Because what I was seeing at Gartner was I was talking to these leaders and I was telling them things that we know work. For example, you need to track the value of the data solutions you're providing to your organization. What is the business value of higher quality data? What is the business value of that data science model you're deploying to? What is the value? Like in terms of dollars, what are you doing, right? Can you justify the investments you're making? I would give that advice and it would not be integrated. It wouldn't be implemented. Or if it was, it wasn't really focused on business values, focused more on data quality metrics.
Right.
So there was this gap. And what I decided and what I started to see after 3 years of these conversations every day, day in, day out, 5 conversations every day with data leaders.
Wow.
Is that I saw what could best be described as massive challenges related to mindset. And this is the genesis of this idea of becoming a more modern data leader. My key assertion is that, and this is something that I really, really hope gets more study, I want to put some quant metrics around this. I don't want this to just be an opinion. So that being said, I came to the conclusion that we really, really suffer from what could best be described, and some people may bristle a little bit at this, but what could best be described as negative mindsets, right? Which are the opposite of there's a psychological phenomenon called the growth mindset, popularized by a woman named Carol Dweck, who was a Stanford psychologist, who said, hey, there's this thing called the growth mindset of people who want to learn, want to innovate, want to shake free from the status quo. They want to grow. They want feedback, right? There's a lot of things that define what could best be called a growth mindset. And there's a lot of things that best define what Carol Dweck called a fixed mindset, but I'm actually calling a negative mindset because I think we need to call it what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the genesis for the modern data, this modern data playbook, where I'm saying, hey, what are different ways of thinking about data? What are different ways of thinking about our role? What are different ways of thinking about things that could help us break free from this addiction to the status quo?
It's so crazy. I feel like you're somehow inside my computer, because my next question is the lack of data leadership a leadership problem or a data problem? You're telling me it's not even any of those things. It's a mindset issue. But do you think, like, leaders, are they born? Are they forged? I mean, most people are thinking, if I can get more data, I'm going to crush it. I'm just going to get more. I'm going to have more compute, which I'm not a fan of the word compute. But you need the compute. And then if I have the compute, I can crunch the data and I can create probably a better leader than you could with your wet brain. I mean, is there something like that? Is that part of the fixed mindset? Is it stuck on technicals? It's stuck on, acquisition. And then the other stuff just feels kind of woo-woo,
Yeah. Well, it kind of does, which I think is part of our challenge to right the ship here. But to address some of the things that you said, so most certainly our problem here is not a lack of technology.
Are you sure?
Right. No, most certainly we do not suffer from a lack of technology. So the question you asked is this a lack of leadership? Is this a lack of data? A lot of data leaders think the core problem is a lack of what they call a data culture. And there's a lot of finger pointing and a lot of blame going on with a lot of data leaders saying, you organization, you people outside of the data organization don't have a data culture. So I'm doing my best here, right? I'm publishing the dashboards, I'm building the data science models, I'm doing the stuff, I'm doing the work, I'm trying to get you to come to the darn governance meetings and you don't show up.
Oops.
So that's my evidence that you don't embrace data and there's no data culture here, and I'm doing the best I can. And after 16 to 18 months, I'm probably just going to leave. If you look at the survey data from Gartner and the survey data from others, the top 5 things about what data leaders say are the core barriers are largely external to the data function. They are things like this concept of data literacy, which I have a massive problem with, and we can talk about that a little bit more.
I would love that.
Sure, but a lack of data literacy, a lack of data culture, a lack of stakeholder engagement and support, all sorts of things that are outside the data function. But this idea is a hallmark pattern of somebody who thinks from a more of a negative perspective. It's called an external locus of control. There is a term for this in psychology, which says if you are growth mindset, you will be like, hey, listen, tell me, help me understand, help me learn, right? And I'm first and foremost steering this ship, and it falls to me. And if I'm not learning, if I'm not growing, if I'm not shaking free of the status quo, then that's on me. Right? The exact opposite of that, it's on them. Right? It's on them. It's those that don't embrace the data culture. It's them that don't care about data quality. And I have so much proof that they don't care about data quality because the stuff they put in the CRM system is junk. The stuff they put in the ERP system is junk. And I'm just doing yeoman's work here to squeeze a little bit of lemonade out of this giant lemon pile. Right? Like that's the perspective we're talking about here, Jacob. This and this is what I saw over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
To your question, are leaders born? Are they made? Is the problem the data? Leaders most certainly can be made. You can train people. Our brains are infinitely malleable. You can change your perspective. Glass half full, glass half empty. We can change the way data leaders think here. We most certainly can. So this is a development opportunity, I would argue, but the problem runs incredibly deep. It's incredibly deep. Just the idea of garbage in, garbage out.
Mm-hmm.
Right, garbage in, garbage out. Can you imagine if the COO of Frito-Lay consistently referred to their corn as garbage? Right? Or the COO of Anheuser-Busch was always complaining about how crappy their water was that went into their beer? I mean, think about it.
If you physicalize it, that's why data gets a pass because it's in the air, it's in the cloud. But if you physicalize it, you're like, hold on. Imagine you're making a blueberry muffin. Like tell me
this. Here's another one, right? This is my story around data literacy.
Yeah,
and honestly, don't get me wrong. I'm friends with Jordan Morrow, who is the self-professed godfather of data literacy, literally wrote the book, Be Data Literate. Okay. I've spoken with Jordan many, many times, and we have some differing opinions here, and that's okay. It's okay to have differing opinions. But when you have something that is even has good intentions, even if you've got good intentions, if you try to implement that into an environment that is rife with a negative mindset, that is so glued and addicted to the status quo, even the things that have good intentions behind them will inevitably fall off the rails. I think the intentions behind literacy are okay, mm-hmm. right? Having a trained and knowledgeable user base, right? That makes sense. How do you argue to have a trained and knowledgeable user base? That of course you want a trained and knowledgeable user base,
right?
However, how data literacy is being implemented at most companies looks nothing like that. And the story that I tell you went back to you used the muffins, I think. Imagine if you were a baker, right? And you do like pastries and breads and whatnot, and you were in a little small town, mm-hmm. and you were the only baker in that town. And you set up a shop on a busy street with lots of foot traffic and lots of vehicle traffic, and you're the only baker there, and you are building, you are making artisanal breads and artisanal pastries every day. And you put them on the shelf. And you get a few customers in the first few days, and then everybody stops coming. And you're like, damn, what the heck's going on? I think these people don't understand the value of the nutritional value of bread and the effort that I put into creating an artisanal work of art. So I'm going to force them into training. To the degree that a baker would even have that capability. But this is my way of saying data literacy in many ways, and for many organizations, I can say this from having talked to these data leaders while I was at Gartner. The genesis here is, okay, people aren't using the dashboards, right? They're not using the dashboards. We spent a buttload of money on Tableau, Qlik, Burst, insert name here, doesn't matter. And they're not using the damn dashboards. So we're going to have to get them trained to see, so they see the value of the product. Well, I'm a product person. And if I'm that baker, the first thing I'm going to say is my bread sucks. Right? Like it's the natural first thing that any product person would say is that there's a problem with the product. And I don't hear a lot of people in the data world actually saying that. I don't hear a lot of people saying, wow, maybe we missed the mark. Wow, maybe we missed some requirements. Wow, maybe we really don't understand the business processes that well. Wow, maybe our quality is not that good. Maybe people don't trust the data. What do we need to do? What do we need to own? How do we need to grow in order to better serve our customers?
Wow. What you're saying is reminding me of jazz musicians. You know, they'll be like, oh, people aren't liking this. Well, they don't know. They don't know the skills that came into here. And if you understood late 1800s, the influx of European classical music and African musical instruments and Tin Pan Alley and then, oh, well, you already lost them again, man. And so that's one thing. It reminds me of marketers too. Like the reason our marketing isn't working, it's never the marketers. It's never how you can do it. Then they'll probably blame the product folks, who then might blame the customer service folks, who then might blame the CEO, who then might blame their niece who gave them a bad lead on how good TikTok is. So It's like, it's very interesting that everybody wants to pass the buck. It feels very narcissistic. It feels very vulnerable. Vulnerable narcissism is the opposite. Narcissism is like, I am this, and vulnerable narcissism is everything happens to me. And so You're thinking a lot of people are not maybe like that, but they're paid. So they're paid to be experts. Y'all don't understand. I mean, do you think the incentive structure supports a culture of narcissism that is unwilling to check out their own navels?
There's some of that. But it really kind of traces back to me, I think, of what I would just loosely call a lack of a product management function, a lack of customer centricity, right? I think a useful North Star for all data leaders in all data functions, a useful, arguably a thought exercise, but a useful North Star thought exercise would be to ask yourself, what would I need to do to run the data function as a P&L? Right? If I literally had to run that shop, the metaphoric shop where I'm selling the bread is the reports, the APIs, the models, the pipelines, the whatever, doesn't matter. If I had to literally run on a P&L, could I? And what would I need to do in order to have a true profit and loss where people were willing to pay for the stuff that I gave them? So to your question about incentives, the cost of being wrong in the data and analytics world, outside of some of the compliance and regulatory driven use cases that keep governance functions running, that's fine. Outside of that, the cost of being wrong is relatively low. Ultimately, you may lose your job. And a lot of CDOs are losing their job.
Yes.
But there's so much legacy technology out there. I mean, there's a lot of people that are still running AS400s that will never lose their job
because they're they're the toothpick holding up the tower of Pisa.
Exactly. But the cost of being wrong, okay, so you piss some people off on the business side, or maybe you lose your job, but you don't go broke.
Yeah.
Right? And so I like the thought exercise of thinking, could we run this as a business? Could we run this as a profit and loss? And if we had to put a price tag on every dashboard, could we? And if we did, would people pay? Would they pay? So from an incentives perspective, to your point, that's the model and that's the mindset we need. Because then it goes from the, hey, you don't get it. Right. I'm doing my best.
Yeah, y'all don't understand.
Lemonade here.
You don't understand my passion.
Like exactly. there's a lot of people that erroneously think because we both work for the same company, right? That me as a data person, that I'm on an equal footing with somebody in sales and marketing. You're not. You're not. You exist to serve them. They are your customers. The power dynamic is not equal. You may work for the same company, but the way you need to start thinking about things is that you serve them.
Well, and
they don't serve you, you serve them.
Well, and then I would say to my sales and marketing brethren and sistren out there, you need to start talking to your data people like they have valuable gold, because they do. Yeah. And, you know, I mean, just getting sales and marketing on the same page is like, you know, uniting North Ireland in the 70s, you know, and then data is here, and it's like, I have the information. You can make really awesome personalized sales things. Like, you could make really insightful, you know, qualitative and quantitative insights and put that in your advertising, and you don't have to make anything up. It's all based on truth. But do you have, you know, that? And so so you have your thoughts about literacy. What's your thought about democratization? Is that, what's your thought there? Because
it's a cop out mostly.
It's a vote, Malcolm. You know, if you vote, then democracy will win. And you're like, oh man, you really got to get in there and feel some incentives.
I've seen this pendulum swing back and forth so many times. Like, this is real gray hair. You can't see this, you know.
Audience, he does have a little.
Talking. I'm like, I've seen, starting with data marts. Oh my God! And we're gonna slap OBIE on top of data marts, and we're gonna let you build your own Cognos cubes, and back and forth and back and forth, And don't get me wrong, folks, right? If you take that customer-centric approach, if you take a product management approach, there is a certain subset of your users who are power users and who want the dashboards. And who are okay with it, right? But if I'm in a factory making fabric, right? Some of that fabric is going to go to high-end use cases. Some of it will go to low-end use cases. Some of it will go to the middle of the market. There's a broad market here with different needs and different capabilities and different skills. And just saying I'm going to let it loose isn't the right approach. It should be, I'm going to let it loose for a certain subset of customers. And then for other customers, they're going to need more handholding. They're going to need more prepackaged stuff. And they're higher touch. Yeah, they may be a little. They may complain a little bit more. Maybe they'll provide more active feedback, and that's okay too. Right. So I'm not saying forget data democratization. I'm just saying if you do all of that and you don't do the other stuff, like what I would call like go-to-market function, training, enablement, right, support, is there support? Like you know, letting people loose on a data catalog? No. Like, no, right? Like, have you seen the average data catalog? Have you looked into it? Like, it's like, what the hell am I looking at?
For sure. Well, but there you just said that data catalog is kind of a mess. Garbage in, garbage out. It's a lot of cop-outs here. What are the barriers? I mean, like, if you're on a data team and you're constantly, you know, regexing things and cleaning up. And Scott Taylor had a funny thing in one of his keynotes where he was talking about 7-Eleven. And he was like, is that a store? Is that a date? Is that a time? It could be all of that, depending on how the macros run. You know, so I thought that was super funny. But how much is data cleanliness? Is there a hygiene approach that you have? Because what you're talking about is leadership. What you're talking about is mindsets. But then there is that very grassroots kind of trench warfare stuck in the Excel spreadsheets. I mean, what's your shout out to the people that are, you know, getting mustard gas with this, you know, data? I mean, why is it so messy? What's going on? What's your kind of general pattern?
So what I'm about to say is going to sound a little heretical. And the spirit of what I'm about to share comes from a place of really being passionate about changing the way we think about our data and our relationships with our customers, who are also our suppliers, by the way.
Yeah, don't forget where it came from.
Right, exactly. So there are suppliers and our customers, and we really desperately need to change the way we think about our relationship with them and the way that we think about them. It's funny you should mention Scott. I mean, I have known Scott for years and years. He and I traveled the world together doing kind of data road shows. He's a very, very dear friend of mine. That 7-Eleven slide, I saw him the first time he ever presented that. The first time he ever presented that,
and
I
it's
was
not getting older. He
right,
could keep doing that for a while.
Yeah, I know. I know it. But there's a few things that I would ask data professionals to keep in mind.
Yeah.
And I'll start with the punchline, and then I'll work backwards from the punchline. The punchline is this: data quality is an opportunity, not a burden. Okay, it's an opportunity and it's not a burden. Thinking of it as a burden is going to put you on a back foot. It's going to put you into that negative mindset, and it's going to make you start thinking that people don't appreciate what you do. It's going to make you start thinking that people question the value of what you do, that your job is harder than it may be. It is not a burden. It is an opportunity. What do I mean by that? Well, there are two uses of data. There's analytical uses and there's operational uses. Every one of those 800 instances of 7-Eleven on Scott Taylor's spreadsheet may be, I don't know if it is or it isn't, but may be fit for purpose for that operational use. If somebody is in a CRM or ERP and sees 7-Eleven in numeric form, sees it 7-Eleven in written form, sees 7-11 or 7/11, they're going to know exactly what it is.
Right.
They're going to know generally they're going to know exactly what it is, meaning that quality may be good enough to support that operational use of data, which is a critical use of the data. When it comes to analytics, there may be a problem there, right? And we say, aha, that's crap data. And then we start waving our finger at our business partners and saying, shame on you for that crap data.
Or we can blame platforms too. Oh, Salesforce.
Or whatever.
Oh.
Sure. Whatever. Right. Oh, yeah. Salesforce, crappy object-based databases and
structured.
Okay. Right. But that data may be perfectly fit for purpose for an operational use case. Having built these systems, having managed large teams of software engineers, I can tell you with certainty that systems are configured and defined and built in a way very consciously. And there are trade-offs that are made every day between the quality of data that is input, right? And the speed at which that system or process runs. Marketing is rife with this. There are constant trade-offs in marketing between what data we capture and the speed and ease at which that process will be executed. And marketers consistently, this gets back to incentives, will consistently tend to lean towards making it easy because that optimizes their business process.
Right.
In the process, it may make our job harder to fulfill the analytical promise of that data.
Right.
But there were choices that were made consciously on the operational side to make the data the way it is. There are data entry errors. There's fat fingering. There's all sorts of stuff that happens. And don't get me wrong, human error is real.
Sure.
And it's a problem.
Sure.
But it is what it is.
Right.
This is my way of saying, Jacob, that assuming just because it's hard to solve some of these analytical use cases or it creates work does not mean that data is garbage.
Right.
Another trait of somebody who deeply embraces a fixed or negative mindset is highly deterministic thinking. Highly binary, all or nothing thinking, where data is either good or bad. It is a mental shortcut that allows us to ignore the nuance that exists in every choice that is made to capture every object and field of data. There are choices that go on there, right? There are choices that are being made. There are trade-offs that are being made. And us simply saying it's garbage fails to take into account that all the other stuff, that there may be a valid reason for why that data looks that way. And when we don't empathize, and when we don't even try to empathize, we don't even try to understand, we don't even try to say, hey, listen, this is making my job harder, but that's okay. That's what I get paid for. Instead, we say it's garbage. Woe is us. Why is it so hard to do what we do? They don't give a crap about data quality. Darn you, business.
And darn you, data inputters for disrespecting us. But what you say,
I'm being a little extreme, but
no, but I love it. But what you're saying is that there's a level of intuition with somebody who's skilled and understands this stuff. They're not going to be dissuaded and be like, this isn't right. They'll be like, yeah, I get it. Keep going. Like there's something powerful. Like you say, human, error works, but human intuition is also on board, and the nuance that it can catch and parse, with a really highly skilled person, like, man, they are valuable. And then for them to ever think that they're not is sad.
Well, it's interesting you should use intuition, because this, in terms, we love deterministic frameworks, right? We love binary
marketing. My man.
No, but we know in the data world, to me, this was another learning that these are traits of people who tend to see the world through more of a fixed perspective or a negative perspective.
Yeah.
This all or nothing thinking. We love this. Another one. So garbage in, garbage out is one of them that we use all the time.
Right.
Another one is data driven. What the hell does that mean? Right? What does that even mean? And if you ask, for most people, it's, oh, okay, well, you used data to make decision, or you pick intuition. So you talk about intuition. That's why I'm going to intuition.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think intuition is?
Well, I have a really good definition, but I'd like to hear yours.
Well, I don't. There's no revelation here. I mean, intuition is the grand sum total of all of your experiences. It's certainly biased, for sure. Bias are a form of mental shortcut that have evolved over the years, and in a way serve a purpose.
Get you quicker.
Yeah, exactly. So not all bias is bad. Some of them most certainly are bad, but not all of them are bad. So it's a function of all of your previous experience. It's a function of your bias. It's a function of your expected outcomes.
Right.
You are in a constant state of game theory to try to optimize and make decisions which you think are going to optimize given a certain set of circumstances. So
right.
All of this is happening in our brains, and yet data people say, well, that's not data driven. And the idea, what's the opposite? Would it be, the opposite would be like, oh, okay, I have instant access. Boom, right now.
Omniscience. Would omniscience?
I have the dashboard at the time I want it with the data that I needed that is fit for purpose. And I'm going to have that right in my hand. And I'm going to be able to look at it and ruminate a little bit. And maybe then I'll go for a second opinion. I'll ask for others for opinion. And you're probably going to do that, hopefully, if you're spending millions on a piece of software.
Right.
But if you have to make a decision, a game time decision, given limited amount of data and limited access to data in a tense situation where you need to move now, well, then you have to rely on intuition, and that's not bad.
No.
But when we reduce things to data-driven or not data-driven, right? What I just described, which is a very human and very normal and very reasonable behavior, is, well, you're not data-driven. Right. And this is the world we live in, where we're pushing things to these extremes where it's like, well, either you embrace data or you don't embrace data. And if you don't embrace data, I don't know how I'm going to help you.
Well, I got to say, like, man, I was just thinking about me physically driving a car only using the dashboard. Why is there a windshield? That's for losers. I'm going to use the dashboard, 100% data-driven, black out the windshield, and get going. Because if it's true that data-driven is the only way to make the best decisions, you don't need a windshield in your car. You don't need actual people to talk about second opinions. Man, no. And so I think maybe this might be getting into that AI thing, because all of this stuff is critical before you get into even the existing big data we have today, but for damn sure the AI and the assistants and all the generative stuff that's coming downstream of LLMs. Like, the fact is they are rule-based things, and you need to inform it with a little intuition. And intuition is based on not only experience, but expertise that has escaped the rule decision. Like, I read this book. It was Mind Over machine. It was Hubert Dreyfus, 1988. He's in the progenitor stage of AI. They were calling them expert systems, and they were training them with experts. And they were saying, explain how you do what you do, expert of all types. And one really interesting example, they had flight instructors. And this is like at the Air Force, like high, flying, dogfights, intense G-forces, all this stuff. The flight instructors were giving advice that was going with their instruction. Now, when those flight instructors were in the simulators, they looked to see if they followed their initial onboarding checklist and stuff, and none of them did. Even the instructors didn't know that they didn't follow the advice that they were giving. Because at that level of expertise, they're beyond rules. They know what to do. It's just sort of this second nature thing. So taking all of that, how important is data leadership going to be in really taking advantage of the AI wave that's coming at us?
Well, the short answer is it's critical. The immediate term, what we're seeing is that it's far less critical than we thought. And let me explain. And I would argue it should be critical, and it must be critical, and we must hone our data leadership skills in order to remain relevant in an era of data and analytics fueled by AI or enabling AI.
Yeah.
So we must become better leaders in order to take advantage of the AI goldmine that is sitting before us.
For sure.
This requires an entirely different mental paradigm. I think you were trying to hint at this. And that mental paradigm is one that deeply embraces the probabilistic nature of the way these systems behave, which necessarily requires you to jettison the deterministic thought patterns you've been using for the last 30 years to run a data analytics function. Okay? Right? The idea that data is either correct or incorrect. You're data driven or you're not data driven. These deterministic patterns, either it's a null field or the field is populated. And I could keep going on and on and on. But the fact of the matter is that AI-based systems are probabilistic, right? And it may be this under this situation with this level of probability, right? And that is the first job that we need to embrace, which means that every way that we've been managing classic, what I would call classic data management and data governance, you need to apply a new lens to that. You desperately need to apply a new lens to that. Some have. A recent survey that I read from New Vantage Partners, which is a guy named Randy Bean, who publishes a CDO survey every year.
Cool.
Coming out of the CDO IQ conference at MIT. He said that 5% of companies have a customized Gen AI based. He suggested customized. He didn't actually use that word, but in production. Which means they've built some adaptation. I assume it would be a complex RAG pattern. It would be maybe a vector database sitting on top of an open source LLM. Maybe they've even gone so far as to fine tune an open source LLM, but that's 5% of companies. So 5% of companies have been able to make the jump, are thinking differently about AI, and are working desperately to find ways to operationalize AI at scales in ways that are more meaningful for their company. The other 95% of companies, which some of them are, 70% of companies are using Gen AI in some way, shape, or form, but the way they're using it is through off-the-shelf chatbots, right? Copilots, Git copilots in Power BI. They're using these copilots that are literally out of the box.
All right.
Right?
Why don't those work, Malcolm?
Well, so these people who are out there on LinkedIn talking about, well, the AI bubble has burst. There's no use case for AI. I'm like, what? Like what? So the idea that like every teenager on the planet is not getting value from ChatGPT to help with their homework. I mean, like this is not Hadoop, right? There are use cases here that abound. 70% of companies are using some Gen AI solution. People in sales and marketing are using them to write advertising copy. People in software engineering are using them to write login scripts. Right? They are being used. They're absolutely positively being used. And the idea that there is no value there, there's no use case there, to me, I find laughable.
Right. Well, it's like when MIDI came out. They're like, oh, that'll never take over the symphony orchestra. It'd be like, just give it a couple years, man.
Well, right. And the cost, right? A lot of people are saying, oh, well,
crazy.
Yeah, the people are saying, oh, there's 500 to 600 billion have been invested in Gen AI and only 100 billion in return so far. It's like, okay, well, great. Do you expect after you buy that solar panel and put it on your roof that the payback is going to be there in year one? Of course not. Of course not. It's not an immediate payback. There are
another
companies that are investing
mindset shift. Another mindset shift.
Right. But which is kind of ironic given the fact that we know that 90% of data and analytics leaders really don't measure the business value in dollar terms of their data. Yet they're also many of them are also saying, okay, well, there's no business value here. So, okay, well, that's ironic. But that aside, how do we get to a point where we're data leaders, where we develop the leadership skills needed to drive value from these systems? Well, there's a few things that we desperately need to do now, like quickly. And this is not a big lift. I already mentioned one of them, which is thinking differently about data, embracing the probabilistic nature of the way these systems work, which means forget about perfection, not happen. It's not going to happen. It was always a dream to begin with.
Right.
But we really, really need to forget about that. Another thing that we need to desperately embrace is let go of the status quo. Let go of these platitudes. Saying we need to double down on foundations and double down on governance is not enough. It doesn't mean anything because it's a platitude. Hard to argue. Who's going to argue, hey, we need to be better at data quality? Hard to argue, but what does that actually really mean? In the case of Gen AI, not ML models, neural networks, all this other stuff that we've been doing a long time. But in the case of Gen AI, these systems are created by and optimized by unstructured data, text, right? Stories, narratives, complex triples, right? Like these models were trained off the internet, not exactly known as a bastion of data quality. Right? Like they were trained off the internet, yet somehow they're still pretty darn good. And somehow they're still being used by kids to do homework around the world. Right. So, but back to the unstructured data thing, right? Which is unstructured data. For 2 years, we've had a lot of, and the data suggests that anywhere upwards of 95%. For 2 years, we've had a lot of data leaders saying, oh, man, I can't use my data to train models. Well, you're not going to train models. You're not going to train your own custom LLM. Maybe there's a smaller version down the road. Maybe you'll fine tune some models, but you certainly won't be training them. The first version of Bard, 70 billion parameters, took 8,000 cores running for 12 weeks straight. Do you have 8,000 cores just kicking around? Right.
Like, I can get you a core. What time is it right now? I can get you a core, Malcolm.
$30,000 machines. These are $30,000 machines. Right. And do you have 8,000 of them to create your own model? But for 2 years, we've had data people saying, well, my data is crap, so I can't build custom models. When in reality, you never were anyway, right? The data that you were managing and governing is largely, not exclusively, but largely, at least from a governance perspective, sitting in rows and columns.
Right.
That for the most part is useless to Gen AI. Try to ask ChatGPT to consume SQL. Like, there are things you can do. You can try to slap a knowledge graph into some complex RAG pattern. A friend of mine, Juan Cicada, is doing some amazing work there and has showed some improvement.
Right.
But it's not like you can say to ChatGPT, hey, go to this set of data over here in this relational table and immediately consume it and immediately turn it into some sort of amazing statement that basically replaces Power BI. No.
Right.
No. That's not how these systems work. But for 2 years, we've had data leaders talking about, how they need to double down on governance. The governance you need to double down on is your marketing SharePoint server. Right?
Who knew that?
well, but like, I mean, where you need to be is all those PDF files sitting out on drives across the organization that you have no awareness even exist. That may be
right now, today,
exactly right.
Right now, not in this idealized
exactly right.
future where we're like tapping things in the and then I beam up. No,
right.
I'm saying this stuff is here right now.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And by the way, you actually can use open source LLMs, and you can customize them through a fine tuning process if you feel like you have a decent corpus of that unstructured data.
Right.
But like unstructured data, if you don't have your hands around your unstructured data, if it like, that's where you need to be looking, right? Because in the short term, that's the stuff that is most easily consumable by LLMs, where you could maybe start building some customizations to these chatbots and copilots. Else, you're just going to be using out of the box solutions like most of the people are right now.
Oh man! After this, I'm going to show you the stuff that we've been cooking up at Ninja Cat, because it's like you're kind of knocking on the door, and I'm like, maybe Malcolm should come on in here and see behind the curtain. But the idea that it isn't this columns and rows, it's actually this other stuff that you've been ignoring, like that. That seems to be applicable and transferable across not only to product engineering, data, marketing, sales, leadership. Like everybody could be doing and thinking like this.
Yeah.
Why aren't they doing that? Is it the siloization? Is it just because people suck, Malcolm? Is that what you're telling me?
My theory,
man?
Jacob, is this it's this broader concept of a mindset that is addicted to the status quo.
Wow.
And it's not a growth mindset. It's not a because I'm not that smart. I'm not a data scientist. Right. I'm not an AI expert, but I spent a couple weeks peeling the onion on this stuff. And looking into how things worked. And I figured out pretty quickly, wait a minute, this is diesel. And we're over here talking about unleaded.
And then somebody's selling us corn, you know,
right.
and you're just saying we're kicking down the can, the road, just kick it. That's it.
Same is true with data science, by the way. So like, you know, if you're not talking Gen AI and you're talking more advanced data science use cases, I hear a lot of data people out there talking about, oh, okay, well, I need to double down on my foundations in order to, you know, in terms of like foundations, what I mean by that, data management stuff, data quality, master data management, data integration, metadata management. Like I need to double down on all of that stuff in order to facilitate a data science use case. Well, the data scientists I talk to completely live in their own world and will go straight to the source. They're not getting data out of your MDM hub because they can't explain it, right? If there's some sort of complex match process that, like some multivariate match process that has run to create some gold master record, and the data scientist doesn't know what the rules were to create that, didn't know what the ETL processes were that got the data into that place in the first place, right? That didn't know how the source data was transformed. If they can't explain any of that stuff, which they generally can't, because like most of these rules are living in developers' heads somewhere, or whoever wrote the engineering pipeline to land the stuff in Databricks in the first place. Okay, great. That's wonderful for an analytics use case. But the data scientists are like, I don't know what that stuff is. I can't explain any of that stuff. And my whole world is about explainability and predictability and being able to build models that I can explain and model the behavior. So I'm going to go straight to the source. And I'm going to write custom Python. I'm going to hand roll some R. I'm going to do whatever I need to do in order to get to the data to a point. And where, by the way, a certain degree of variability of that data, something that we in the BI world would call a data quality issue, for a data scientist, a certain amount of variability, it actually represents the real world, as imperfect as it may be.
Well, right? I was talking to somebody and they were like, your analytics dashboard should have plus minus stuff on it. You say, well, like, this is about right. And I was like,
zones.
Is that so? No. I'm showing you a hockey stick. Give me more money. Like, you were like, no.
I like that.
No, like but that. You're just like, if you want to pretend like you're doing science stuff, use science, you ding dongs, you know?
But so a friend of mine, Joe Reese, recently had a post on LinkedIn where he was opining, and it was actually something he'd stuck out on his Substack. So definitely recommend talking to Joe.
Oh yeah, put a link.
He's awesome, brilliant guy. Where he on his Substack he wrote a short piece talking about BI versus AI. It's basically everything that I just said.
Oh,
right, which is BI, rows and columns, structured world of you know, engineering pipelines, and you know AI. hand rolling everything, customizing everything, and that's totally fine. Where, by the way, AI is also a highly experimental R&D function. Where in the data world, we hear things like, well, only 20% of models get to production, and we're like, oh my God, that's horrible. But if you looked at that through the lens of an R&D function and said, oh, okay, if I'm company X and I spend 20% on and I get a 20% ROI on my R&D spend, that's actually pretty good.
Yeah.
Right. If I develop, 1 out of every 5 things that I work on turns into a product,
screaming.
Right. That's actually really good.
Right.
But this is part of the mindset shift, Jacob, that I'm talking about here, which is, in the AI or in the BI world, we'll be like, okay, man, you guys are just farting around a lot.
Yeah.
You're throwing a lot of spaghetti at the fridge and you're wasting a lot of time. It must be because your data is crap. And the AI people are like, hey, I'm killing it, right? 1 in 5 models actually gets to production. This is hard stuff. There's a lot of iteration here. There's a lot of experimentation here. There's a lot of stuff going on here, and I'm killing it. So we as on the BI side of the house really, really need to start thinking differently about this stuff. We need to start thinking differently about the data. It's not all garbage. There is a reason why it is the way that it is, and sometimes there were difficult choices that went into making it that way.
Right.
We need to start thinking differently about our customers because they are our customers and we exist to serve them. We need to start thinking differently about our roles within the organization, the things that we do day in and day out, the way that we approach our jobs, the word that we use to describe our jobs. When we do those things, we'll become what I'm calling a modern data leader.
Oh my gosh. Well, it's just like, it's almost like you have talked about this at length at keynotes, have done thousands of interviews, spent years in the field. It's almost like you know what you're talking about. My last question before we go, because you do have a life, the audience is probably hungry. Is it about politics, like small p? Like some of the skills, like some of the most creative people I've seen, some of the most intensely smart people I've seen, don't have the vert. Is it intro? Is it extra?
Yeah.
Is it, is it politicking? Is it sort of like, and people don't, I'm on a butt kiss. Like if you're into this, you're not, or like whatever, like it's not just status quo. Like, of course, people don't want to do work. We're cognitive misers. If we cannot think, we would prefer that.
Right.
But I'm wondering if a lot of people are turned off because it's butt kissing or it's politics, or I'm just an introvert, or I'm an extrovert. So I talk way too much. And can this person learn to shut the fuck up? I don't know. But do you think politics plays a role, or knowing how to navigate political, small p, internal?
By the way, I may reuse cognitive miser
I borrowed that from, I don't know.
If allowed. I really like that.
That's what we are.
Yeah, well, by design. Getting back to my previous comment about bias.
Yeah.
Bias is a form of cognitive misery.
Heuristicalness?
Misery? I don't. Anyway, is it about politics? Well, I would argue that to successfully execute a data analytics function, you need to be reasonably good at marketing. Does it mean that you as a CDO need to be the marketer? No, you don't. But you do need to be a leader. Everything that I've just described, I would argue you can do with an internal focus, and I would argue transcends butt kissing. I would argue that being hyper customer focused is hyper efficient, right? And it's not a butt kissing exercise.
Not at all.
Now, but for some, I think for some, the humility required here may be uncomfortable, right? I think for some to admit that we exist to serve others may be uncomfortable,
right?
I think for many, acknowledging that we are a big part of the problem and not somebody else may be uncomfortable.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't see any of that being politics. I see that being self-exploration. And I see that being agency, which ultimately, to me, is how I want to live, and I think is the right way to run our jobs and the right way to run our lives. We're driving, and that's the only world that I really want to live in. So,
man, and I feel like I'm just like the audience is on their feet. We have made signs, Malcolm for office, get him out of the middle. I mean, this guy's the data hawker. I mean, like, he is here to tell us the truth, to take us into the place. But the only place we're going is inside of you. Reflect on your stuff, the values, the way you approach life. Like, it's awesome to hear somebody who is you could obviously be way deep into, calculations and, algorithmic, all those things. And you're saying there are places for that. You actually,
absolutely,
you essentially need those skills. It is nothing to skip over, but this soft skill is like, so hard. And but if you can do it, you're going to see massive transformation, because you're going to lose a lot of your anxiety. You're going to lose a lot of your distrust. You're going to lose a lot of that no one understands, and you're like, well, enjoy the alley, garbage in, garbage out. That sounds like Oscar the Grouch, man. Get out. Sesame Street is the place we live on. This is real life. Your thoughts about AI and BI, awesome, man. We could go on, but we can't. How can people connect with you online and learn more, Malcolm?
Thank you. I appreciate that. There are 3 Malcolm Hawkers on the planet, according to LinkedIn.
No, there's only one.
When you spell the name correctly, there's a second L. It's the proper Scottish spelling of the name. But please connect if you're in the world of data and analytics or AI or anything even remotely related to data, and you're searching for Malcolm, chances are pretty good I'll come up. There are actually 2 of us. There's another gentleman named Malcolm Chisholm who also lives in Florida, very close to me.
Odd.
So there are multiple Malcolms, but I'm Malcolm Hawker. Please connect with me on LinkedIn if you are not already. That would be awesome. I have a podcast called the CDO Matters podcast. You can check it out. Go wherever podcasts are available. And always there is my company's website, prophecy.com, PROFISEE.com. We've got a ton of resources, white papers, blogs, videos. I'm creating a ton of content out there around best practices, do's and don'ts. Obviously the ebook that you previously mentioned. So I'd be thrilled if you connected with me in whatever way possible.
Cheese or chocolate?
Are you ready?
Yes.
Cheese or chocolate?
Cheese right now.
Okay.
Chocolate later in the day,
later,
but cheese
okay,
right now.
Yeah. I was wondering earlier
Sweet
in the
later,
morning.
Savory now.
Who knows?
Yeah. All right.
Data or data?
Oh, data.
You're not losing sleep over that. We'll move on.
No.
Smooth jazz or soft serve yogurt?
Oh, smooth jazz.
Just a little
jazz.
Just a little Kenny G, a little David Sanborn, some Boney James. That's grown folk music, Malcolm.
There you go.
Pineapple on pizza, is it criminal or is it critical?
It's critical. It's critical.
Stand by your claims. Stack of books or one at a time?
Stack of books.
I could see you have a.
I'm looking at one right now. Actually,
you have a thirst.
Yeah.
And finally, and this might be the kiss of death: Gene Simmons or Richard Simmons?
Oh, Gene, come on, Kiss, Rock City. Let's do it.
What Gets Measured is a Ninja Cat podcast. Please rate and review the show wherever you find your podcasts. Share this episode on social. And visit us on the web at ninjacat.io.